This, in my opinion, is one of the best looking affordable mechanical chronographs in the market, and it may just be a better value proposition than a pre-ceramic Rolex Daytona. But should you buy one? Ashley and Tabitha are a husband and wife team based in Franklin, Tennessee. For years they wanted to work on a project together, and as a family of 6, plus 2 dogs and a fish, that's a little insane by the way, they had been pressing into defining their family values and increase the gravity for their family culture, and in my opinion this watch is definitely a great step into that dream. I'll say this, at $499 this mechanical chronograph is a great watch for the price. Sure, it's not perfect and I'll get into that later in the video. I personally own an Alpha mechanical chronograph that looked very similar to this one, but the biggest difference is that this watch feels to have a soul, and you can tell the owners pour a piece of themselves in every piece. And the other watch, well, felt very much like a Rolex Daytona homage and lacks a backstory. Remember, the watches are not just about telling time, but more about the story and emotions they evoke. This Dasher watch is called a Linden, and just so you know, that's the name of the owner's 4th child. Let's get into the specs of this watch. The case is made of 316L stainless steel. The case measures in at 39mm, is 48mm from lug to lug, in between the lugs and measures in at 20mm, but the thickness for me is one of the biggest downfalls, as it does measure in at 14.8mm, although without the crystal the watch measures in 13.5mm. Still, to me that's a little on the thick side and really wish the company would maybe revisit that in the future. The watch does feature 50 meters of water resistance, and the watch head weighs in at 71 grams. The case finishing is pretty impressive for a watch costing sub $500. The polishing on the bevels have been nicely finished, and the brushing on the case has been executed decently, and I love the drill holes for easy strap changes. On the back of the watch we find a sterile case back, and the company actually encouraged us to engrave it just like they did back in the old days before people were too worried about resale value. On the side of the case we do find a signed 6.9mm screw down crown along with 5.5mm screw down pushers. I've always been a fan of this aesthetic, and screwing and unscrewing the pushers really feels smooth. However, I do have to mention that when the crown is fully pulled out, it has a bit of play, but it didn't affect the watch in any way. Setting the time and interacting with the movement felt smooth, and winding the ST19 manual movement is always very unique in the sense that the winding feels to have some resistance to it, and when you let go of the crown it rotates back towards you with a bit of force. The dome mineral crystal creates beautiful distortions on that panda dial, and although the company could have easily given a sapphire, they opted against it to purposely give us more of that vintage aesthetic. Around the crystal we find that fixed tachymeter bezel to make this watch look very much like a vintage chronograph used to time race cars' elapsed times, in the same way vintage Rolex Daytonas would. Okay, time to get into the best part of this watch, the dial of course. I don't know about you guys, but I'm a sucker for panda dials, and this dial is super clean. The dial, although black in appearance, is actually matte blue with gray tones. In person, I don't see the hues of blue, but the dial definitely looks more gray than black. The off-white sub-dials do have that vinyl texture to them. The sub-dial on the left shows the running seconds, and the one on the right is the 30-minute counter for the chronograph. The polished hands on those sub-dials have a small broad arrow, and the minute and hour hands reflect the light and look pretty well finished along with the applied indices. Look, the overall look of the dial and hands is very attractive, and I like the balance between the logo and some of the writing at the 6 o'clock. Another thing that in my opinion needs to be improved on is, well, the lume. We can find it on the hands and indices, but it's not that strong. Keep in mind, this is not a dive watch, and I personally get that, but by today's standards, I know for a fact that companies can use some brighter and better lume. The movement being used is a Seagull ST1901 mechanical manual wind movement that is based on the Venus caliber 175 and was first prototyped in 1963 when the Swiss movement manufacturer Venus, now defunct, sold its machinery, tooling, and blueprints for its 175 caliber. The goal was to make Project 304 a watch for the Chinese Air Force. Thus, the ST19 is a direct descendant of the Venus 175, with a few refinements added along the way: 17 versus 19 joules, higher beat rate at 21,600 bph. I personally have never had any issues with this movement, and I love the way the movement looks, and although I would prefer a higher power reserve, say 72 hours as opposed to the 45 hours, the movement is pretty well built for the price point. I kind of wish this watch featured a display case back to see that beautiful movement, but I think that would actually contribute to the thickness of the watch. The watch package did come with some cool little swag, such as a pocket knife, a hanky, a mesh bracelet, and a NATO strap. On my 6 and 7/8 inch wrist, the watch is very comfortable. First, let's talk about that stainless steel 1.3mm Milanese style bracelet. It's signed at the buckle, features a quick release system, it is very easy to size, and where the lugs meet the case, it continues with that vintage aesthetic with the straight lugs. The rib style NATO, on the other hand, does feature solid hardware that's been signed. The strap feels very stiff, but when you put it on your wrist, it's pretty comfortable. One of the biggest pluses for me is the 20mm lug width, as this allows the watch to be paired with a number of different straps. I'm very surprised as to how versatile this watch is, and something interesting to note is that these fitted rubber straps are actually designed for a Rolex Submariner and fit the case like a glove. If you like any of the straps I'm featuring, I'll leave a link to the company so you can go support them. Okay, so why is this watch a better value than a pre-ceramic Daytona, and should you buy one? Well, I don't know if you should buy one, but I personally really like it. And look, getting into vintage watches, especially Rolex, is scary if you don't buy from the right source. And if you're not well versed in that world, well, there's a lot of Franken watches floating around. The acquisition cost is much higher, servicing is expensive, and with the way the market is, the ROI may or may not be there. With a watch like this, you get a lot for your money, $499 to be exact, and you're buying a brand new watch that will be reliable, come with a 1-year warranty, and honestly would make you part of the Dasher family. Look, I'm not saying not to buy a Daytona, I just personally think this is a better option in terms of not breaking the bank, exclusivity, and servicing costs. But hey, if you have that Daytona money, go for it. What I love about the overall look and package of this watch is the vintage aesthetic and that feeling of knowing the owners care so much about their company. Let me know what you think of this watch, and if you're picking one up, be safe out there and stay humble.